Hey there, welcome to Westeros Weekly. I am Filup Molina, and joining me,
Erik Voss.
guys, Game of Thrones is done.
Yeah.
It's we're a couple weeks after the finale episode, and we are, we're gonna have a less structured conversation, I think, these days about Game of Thrones. I think it might get a little looser.
Real.
Oh, it's about to get real.
Yeah.
We're gonna really go back through 8 seasons of this thing and reflect through the series as a whole. I think there was a lot of obsession about that last episode, and hate it or hate it. Like, I think people are very focused on that, but I think it's time we start looking backward at the series that we did love for years and years and years and got a lot of tattoos about. Show that.
Right. Yeah. It's easy just to focus so much on the ending of something, but really it's the whole journey. And I've seen some real angry comments out there saying, "Did I waste several years of my life for this?"
The Crow said that.
Yeah,
and the quit violently.
He's gone. It had nothing to do with any puppeteering the last time we did this. And I don't know about you, Filup. I refuse to see the past couple years of my life as a waste of time. Here at New Rockstars, we believe in gratitude and appreciation for the cool content that we get for free thanks to our parents' HBO logins.
Send us our money.
And I think,
sorry. I was saying that up to HBO.
Yeah.
Sorry, should I have not revealed that we get paid by them?
Well, sure. There were some narrative choices we didn't totally agree with. It didn't resonate with us in the final seasons. It's okay to have mixed emotions about it. But I don't think it is fair for anyone to say that the people working on the show are bad writers. I think any great writers capable of not doing their best work consistently throughout their lives, but to say that they're bad writers, I think is too much of a low blow. And I thought the best way for us right now to go back and look at the show is to look back specifically at the scenes that did not exist in the books that the writers had to wholly invent for the show. Taking the characters that George R. R. Martin had created and the situations he devised, but taking them and writing your best possible fan fiction version of it, of which there are several when you go back through seasons 1 through 8. Several moments that surprised book readers and just casual fans alike. And I think in this episode we should go back and look at those moments.
I started writing a video that I didn't ever finish. It was like 20 pages long, and then I was like, we'll never, this is unshootable. The budget was $6 million.
Release the Filup cut.
Yeah. But in it was just kind of explaining why, the show left you that feeling that was kind of like, I described it as like the wife of an Unsullied on their wedding night, where it's like, this is nice.
It's just there's a key component missing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It focused on liking the characters a lot more than you do in the books, rather than exploring the society that George R. R. Martin has built as a reflection of ours. And so characters there behave the way that they do in social political commentary. Mm-hmm. In the stories that you make a satire piece or something, it's not really about, I mean, not that his is satire, but in a satire, you're trying to make a point more than you're trying to develop that character.
Yeah.
On TV, you need to fall in love with Tyrion and have him say witty one-liners every episode so you can sell t-shirts and stuff, right? Like, That's not really why, but that's the difference. And I think that a point that I wanted to make in that video, and I'll never get around to, was just essentially that one's not better than the other, but they're so different that kind of set everything on this weird path where it was a very jarring, different tone and style. But what I like about what you're saying is we can acknowledge they're definitely not better than the other. They're just different. So let's look specifically just at moments that are from the show that were actually really great improvements on story that does not exist in the books as of yet, at least.
Yes. Yeah. And a reminder that you can get your Game of Thrones coverage and updates early by subscribing to our Westeros Weekly podcast feed. And if you're a Marvel fan, we have an Inside Marvel podcast feed that you can get all of your news and updates soon, and exclusive content on there too.
More podcast feeds coming soon.
Oh, yeah.
Also more stuff on this feed coming that's interesting and exciting to talk about, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
Well, moving on to our first show-only moment, and you might have seen a preview of it. This is way back in Season 1, Episode 5, The Wolf and the Lion, the scene with Robert and Cersei when they finally get real and be honest with each other about what their marriage is. So there's an interesting story behind this. We've talked about this before. The Season 1 situation was these showrunners were adapting these books, or specifically book 1, and HBO came back to them and said, your season is too short. You need to shoot and write more episodes. So Dan and Dave were like, okay, well, what's our dream scene? What's our best fan fiction thing we can come up with? And Robert and Cersei do not get point of view chapters. Robert never gets a point of view chapter. But in book 1, we never see them alone when you're reading the book. So they basically wrote the best version of the scene they could imagine this husband and wife, this king and queen having, and it is fantastic.
It is so uncomfortable. It's like the dinner on The Office where Jim and Pam go over to Michael's place for her, and you just see the uncomfortable relationship that these two have.
It's honest and it's vulnerable. So this is the one where like Robert is just raging about the state of things. He's like, that's all the realm is now. The backstabbing, the scheming, the ass licking, the money grubbing. Sometimes I don't know what holds it together. And Cersei goes, our marriage? And they both have a big laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they both realize that they're just stuck in this political sham and they hate each other. But there's a truth to that.
Yeah, they love ass licking.
That's the truth of that one.
Yeah. I mean, but who doesn't? But also, what it really reveals, obviously, is that they hate each other, but they it's I don't know where it lined up year to year, but essentially it's a parallel to House of Cards, and this idea that our relationship is political machinations at work and maneuvering, not the concept of love is a joke.
No, it's not. Yeah.
But also, people compare that to real life couples. A lot of people feel like there's strategic moves. A lot of people felt like Bill and Hillary had that at certain points in their relationship, where it's, man, have they been running both for president since they met each other?
Yeah. And throughout history, that's kind of been the name of the game, right? Like, very rarely, especially in these high-born political marriages, they're arranged. They're basically set up so that wars will end, or wars will be prevented, or wars will begin. And if George R. R. Martin is an ardent student of history, and that has been one of the big reasons Game of Thrones has been so amazing. So he's been able to reflect that. One difference from, like, The Lord of the Rings, where Aragorn and his love at the end, it seems like a true noble love. She gives up her immortality to live with him and be queen with him forever, and that's a nice romantic view of it, but that's not really how history works.
What's interesting about this scene also is that it's not just what we were just saying about like this loveless thing. There still is the pain of not quite betrayal, because Lyanna Stark came before Cersei in Robert's love life, but there is that jealousy still there, and you can tell that Cersei's kind of like, I guess I was never the one for you,
right? And
she's accepted that, but at the same time, you can see a little bit of like pain there, especially considering, I mean, she's especially in Westeros, like the highest of the highs. Like, you should be so thrilled if you get Cersei Lannister, and he clearly doesn't care. But then there's that really interesting point that Robert makes, where if you think of Lyanna Stark as Helen of Troy, who, the face that launched, is it 1,000 ships or whatever?
Ships.
Yeah. 1,000 she was enough to cause this great chaos and throw millions of people's lives into jeopardy. And he says he can't remember what she looks like.
Right.
Which is so insane that it's shows the weight of powerful people and their love lives, and yet at the same time shows that it's still just normal people and their love lives, where, like, if you haven't seen someone in 10 years or something, maybe it becomes harder. And especially also, he didn't have that much time with her as an adult woman.
Right. Yeah, it's reminiscent of like these bar fights that we've all been in several times. Where they start over, dudes fighting over a girl, but then it just becomes so much more than that, and it's not even about the girl anymore. It's just about the guys
dudes
and their anger.
Connecting.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the pilot episode at the Dothraki wedding, there's that specific point where the two Dothraki are fighting over a girl, and then the one who kills the other one ends up humping a different one altogether. So Daenerys judges that like, oh, so the thing they were fighting over. And so in a way, Robert, as much as he judges Dothraki as these savages, he is, in that same sense, the same kind of savage man who's just angry that his pride was taken away from him. And he's drunken himself into this stupor now that he doesn't even remember what he was fighting over, which is such an interesting character moment. And also, like, the reason I think this is such a great scene is Dan and Dave worked in a lot of, like, major plot points that would end up becoming
later problems.
Yeah. The whole idea of Lyanna Stark, obviously, she's going to play a big role when we find out who Jon's real mother is. And then Cersei says an interesting line, only a fool would meet the Dothraki in an open field. And Robert's like, oh, so I guess you are you think of yourself as this war tactician and this battle queen. And Robert just kind of rolls his eyes at it. But later in the series, we see Cersei become precisely that. And we see what happens when the Lannister forces do meet the Dothraki in an open field. They get destroyed.
And also, I mean, she's the daughter of her father, right?
Exactly.
Has probably prepared her just as well as he prepared Jaime.
Yeah. Speaking of Tywin, I think the next scene that I really loved in the first season was the introduction of Tywin Lannister, which I don't know about you, I think was one of the best character introductions on the show.
I mean, like, as an animal lover,
hard to watch.
It was hard to watch, and yet at the same time, it was. I normally cover my eyes and I start crying, but in this scenario, I was like so engaged by this actor, and I'd never seen the actor before, and I was just like, so he existed to me as, or at least I didn't recognize.
You hadn't seen the Ali G movie where he has to dance?
No, but in this moment, I mean, it was Tywin Lannister from the books come to life, and it was just so engaging. And I remember this is actually around the time where I was like, oh, I'm hooked on this show.
Yeah, I felt the same way. It's the we don't have point of view chapters from either of these characters in book one, but this is the moment where Tywin's bloodily skinning this deer while lecturing his son about family. He tells Jaime the lion does not concern himself with the opinions of the sheep, which is just an interesting Lannister talking point that they repeat to each other throughout the series. And it shows Tywin as this hard ass who's not afraid to get his hands bloody to do what needs to be done, to teach this lesson to his son. And what is he doing? He's skinning a stag, right? Showing the Lannister lion betrayal of the Baratheon stag. So it works on so many thematic layers. And until now, we've heard about Tywin Lannister, but we haven't seen him in action. And we've seen Cersei, we've seen Tyrion, we've seen Jaime, all three of these Lannister kids who use their words effectively, whereas we don't really know who bore them. Now we can see the father who is willing to get his hands bloody and be a jerk and do things like orchestrate the Red Wedding.
But also they are establishing, we've seen these characters who are in their positions of power currently, but they're still just children, really, and ultimately. So when you think that Tyrion is kind of the most witty character on the show, and even Cersei and Jaime, everyone's like is so presented as so they can't be beat. Right. And then you meet their dad, and it's like, oh, all of them are just trying to get his approval.
Exactly.
That's what is motivating. So we talk about Lyanna Mormont, but this is the old disappointed dad face that launched 1,000.
Yeah. This is like Jaime is the first time he's super emasculated on the show. Up until this moment, he's just on top of the world. He's cocky. He pushes a kid out the window and he gets away with all of it. But this is kind of like the kid who bullies you in school, seeing his dad pick him up in his truck in the parking lot, and you just see his dad like yelling at him in the car, and your bully starts crying, and it's satisfying and fascinating to watch.
And you're like impressed with the dad, and you cheer him on. And
you start to feel bad for your bully for a second.
And you're like, I'm hooked on this story now.
I want to. So ultimately, we see Jaime, the Kingslayer, stuck in his father's shadow, and you see the layers of daddy issues that happen in Team Lannister that motivate these characters in seasons to come. Yeah,
there's so another one of my favorite moments from the show that is not from the books is another Tywin moment though, actually, and it's just those conversations that he has with Arya.
Oh yeah.
Are fascinating. Those were again some of the best written show only moments, like specifically the writing. I mean, the little dance that they're playing with each other, where to this day you go back and you watch it and you know that Tywin knows that she has a secret.
Right, that's our next big moment in season 2 or episode 7. It's a whole season later. And what's interesting is that is sort of in the books. Arya serves Roose Bolton, but in the show they're just like, oh, let's put the guy who is commanding the forces against Arya's brother Robb as the guy that she serves. Like, what great dramatic irony, because she's listening into the movement of the Lannister forces, of Robb's victories on the battlefield. Tywin is so smart, and that's what's great about watching earlier seasons is all the characters are at the top of their intelligence. It's just great to see smart characters be smart and outthink each other and not say everything that's on their mind. Like, there's layers of subtext, and just the way that anytime people in war scenarios and political conspiracies talk to each other, there's subtext, there's layers of meaning to what they say, and they only say what they need to say. And in these interactions with Arya and Tywin, yeah, as you said, Tywin, it seems like, knows that there's a deeper secret to this servant girl. In fact, he's one of the few people who recognize that she's a girl at all. Like everyone else just kind of
corrects her grammar, her
right.
lowly born grammar. But he also he's clearly. I mean, if anyone was like kind of playing the Game of Thrones almost effortlessly, it was Tywin Lannister at that time. And it's all those we would watch Littlefinger back in these early seasons. And we're like, that guy's always up to something else.
Right.
But the fact that we could pick up on that kind of shows like, well, maybe he wasn't amazing at it actually. But Tywin, I love in this early scene where they meet. We looking back now are realizing, oh, he was making those kinds of moves where he offers her food from his plate, and we now realize, oh, it kind of like humanized him at the time. He was worried about being poisoned. People had been making threats on his life and trying to kill him. And then here's some lowly person who clearly also is up to something. It's like, well, if this boy dies, nothing's lost, and if the boy lives, I look really nice as an old man that gave you food.
Yeah, and you see Arya's restraint and her patience in this moment, because she gets a knife to cut mutton with, and the camera pushes in on Tywin's neck as he's looking out the window, and she almost goes for it, but then she holds back because she knows that there's no way she would survive or she'd get out of Harrenhal alive if she did that. So she, for the first time, exercises patience. She has power, but she decides not to act on it. And all the while, Tywin is lecturing her about history, about famous lords of the past, about war, about legacy. She learns about the Lord Harren who built Harrenhal.
Right.
Callously assuming that he'd be safe from dragon fire inside this castle without thinking that dragons can breathe fire or fly over him and cook him alive in his castle and turn into a ruin. So Arya's learning about all these things and about the importance of what you leave behind. And these are kind of lessons that you see her apply later in the series. This is a big adult moment for her. She gets the father figure that she lost from Ned, and Tywin gets a daughter figure that he lost from Cersei growing older and becoming a rival to him.
And joining Robert. And this was also from a time when everything was so efficient, right? Like if you were watching what's happening in the scene, listening to dialogue, a lot is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
You called out that it's mutton that he's eating. Mutton is the flesh of a matured sheep. Which is a nice connection if you understand when Tywin says something like the lion does not concern himself with the worries or whatever of a sheep. He's like, yeah, literally, like that's all I eat. The thing I eat every day is what you're bringing to me.
Right. Yeah. So it's a great moment, and we never really get full confirmation on how much Tywin knew. He knew that she was masquerading. He says it's Milord. If you want to pretend to be lowborn, you say Milord, not my lord. That's what highborn kids say. And he knows that she can read too because he sees her reading maps. So it's interesting that he never acts on that, and it kind of remains a mystery how much he knew. You have to assume if he knew that she was Arya Stark, he would have.
Oh yeah, he would have used her.
Absolutely would have used her
as a hostage. Yeah.
But let's move on to another moment that is great when you rewatch the series. It's the moment where Catelyn confesses her guilt over Jon, and she's talking to Talisa. Now in the books, Catelyn hates Jon just like she hates him on the show, but Michelle Fairley, as an actress, brought so much humanity to that character. So the writers wrote this really emotional confession for her in which she talks to Talisa, Robb's new wife, and another character has a lot more to do in the show than the counterpart character does in the books. But Catelyn tells her that when Jon was a baby, she prayed to the gods for him to die because she hated him so much. Jon was a symbol of...
But who hasn't?
Yeah. I mean, it's 3 a.m., that baby's still crying.
It's
yeah.
like, you know what, God?
Yeah.
Give me an out.
So Jon came down with a fever as a baby, and he almost did die. And then Catelyn felt so much guilt that she prayed to the gods again, begging them to let the boy live. And she promised that if Jon were to recover, she would raise him as her own son. And then once the boy did recover, she's like, I'm just kidding. And she continued to treat him horribly. And now she believes that all the horror that befell her family was her fault. She said, this is all because I couldn't love a motherless child.
Right. And it's like an insult to the mother.
Yes.
The god that or one of the gods or something. But yeah, that's something that the matriarch role often struggles with in these kinds of stories is anything that befalls the family. we think of the soldier, the warrior, as the defender of the family, but the matriarch in these stories often feels like it's actually, at the end of the day, the last line of defense is the mother.
Right.
And if you think of it from the animal kingdom, very much, right? It's like, stay away from a mama cat or a mama Voss. Like, they're very dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And what's cool here, in this moment, she's weaving the thing that people who pray to the mother weave. It's this... to the gods, to the seven gods, this kind of prayer thing that she was weaving it when Bran was sick to kind of pray for his recovery. And it was just this nice little bit of world building from the show. The religions of Westeros are fascinating as George R. Martin has created them.
I mean, you're a convert, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I keep jumping back and forth between the faith and the Zoroastrianism. Yeah. But it was just a nice little piece of this culture that in later seasons the show just kind of departed from because it was no longer serving the plot and the story that they needed to tell. But man, maybe they felt that they kind of gassed out on everything religion-wise in season 5 and 6 with the Faith and the High Sparrow and King's Landing. But I loved the little winks at people praying at Weirwood trees, the fact that Jon would go pray at the Weirwood tree and do his vows there instead of in the Sept in Castle Black because he was raised differently and he identified with his father's religion. There's all these little things that feel so real and authentic, and this is an example of that. Just like little plot things, like what are the characters doing with their hands? And I feel like in season 7 and 8, there's a lot of characters just standing in rooms with like brilliant framing and beautiful sets, but like you don't understand like what they're physically doing in that moment. They don't necessarily feel like real people. They feel like actors on a stage. Yeah.
Something I liked about the story about Jon and the fever is that it sets up something that not at this point, but later we start to see Jon is somehow the most tested and yet the most lucky or survivor of things.
He's born with that plot on it.
Yeah, exactly. But it is almost like it makes you wonder: is he destined to be tortured and always be in peril, or is he destined to, no matter what, always survive the day?
Right. Yeah. He has. It makes you wonder about his mortality at all. Of course, he died on the show, but was resurrected. Did the gods or did the Lord of Light always intend on this boy being a hardened survivor to play some greater role? So this again was not something in the books. We didn't know that baby Jon had a fever in the books, but the show kind of imbued him with this strength. A fever. Yeah. It definitely sets him up as this new hero, but it also gives Catelyn a moment of humanity. This is maybe 6 episodes before she gets killed at the Red Wedding. So in a way, it's kind of like a person on death row giving a confession before, they die. So it was a nice moment that humanized her character, and you can see maybe her death as a punishment for a lifetime of torment to Jon.
Well, and definitely for her, probably some of her final thoughts are, I was right, because she looks around her and her entire family is being slaughtered. And she's like, just because I couldn't love Jon. Like, it's exactly what her worst fear was.
Absolutely. Before we continue, we want to thank ExpressVPN for helping us make this episode. Admit it, you think that cybercrime is something that happens to other people, right? You may think that no one wants your data or that hackers can't grab your passwords or credit card details, but you'd be wrong.
It happened to you.
It happened to me. Yeah. It happens to a lot of you, I assume. Stealing data from unsuspecting people on public Wi-Fi is one of the simplest and cheapest ways for hackers to make money. And when you leave your internet connection unencrypted, you might as well be writing your passwords and credit card information on a huge billboard for the rest of the world to see. That's why we decided to take action to protect myself from cyber criminals. I use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. ExpressVPN is easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection only takes one click. Using ExpressVPN, I can safely surf on public Wi-Fi without being snooped on or having my personal data stolen. For less than $7 a month, you can get the same ExpressVPN protection that I have. ExpressVPN is rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/rockstars. That's expressvpn.com/rockstars for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/rockstars to learn more.
Now you just got to stop leaving your Facebook open.
I refuse.
Oh, you enjoy what I do to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm asking for this.
Let's talk about our next moment that was from the show, or at least more important in the show. And that's just it has this famous quote in it, but it's the Littlefinger and Varys scene where he reveals essentially his thesis or his modus operandi or something. Chaos is a ladder.
Yes. And didn't seem like when we were watching this in season 3, it was episode 6, that one of these two characters might win the Iron Throne. It's these two background political conspirators who are in the literal shadow of the Iron Throne, gazing at it, longing for it. And for this moment, they seem like by far the smartest characters in Westeros, because you realize at this point that Littlefinger is a mastermind behind the War of the Five Kings, and we know from the books that Varys is kind of the mastermind behind the Dance of Dragons. And we know that in season 1, he was trying to get Daenerys assassinated, and then he started to plant the seeds of maybe I could use Daenerys to retake the Iron Throne, which he does in season 5. So we're kind of wondering in the end game at this point, which of these two geniuses will take the Iron Throne, despite neither of them having important names or neither of them seeming like good enough candidates, but just by their wits and their skills and their determination alone might be the one to take it. And they open up a lot of interesting points about politics and the nature of conflict on the show.
Yeah, it's like they're campaign managers that are having a kind of off-the-record meeting in the background. I think that it makes me long for... Well, it made me long for moments like this later when in the final season we see that Tyrion kind of adopts a bit of this role too. Kind of, at least he's the front-facing campaign manager too for Daenerys. When we see that Tyrion and Varys are on the same side, that kind of like bummed me out a little bit at the end there, because I was missing this, right? The two great masterminds on opposing sides. And having different goals. In the books, there's a different potential heir to the throne, an additional potential heir to the throne. And so the idea that if that had been included in the show, maybe Varys would have been trying to make his moves to support that character. Tyrion is trying to support Daenerys, and then we have this very complex struggle for the throne, but the political side of it, which we went through the Night King story, and we kind of knew something's going to happen with the throne part, but it kind of fell together. And there was a lot of, she is my queen. I have one queen kind of stuff, instead of really good debate about, well, should it be this person or should it be this person? Yeah. Instead of Jon just saying, well, no, I don't want it to be me.
Yeah, this is a scene that I go rewatch probably once a year, because it just reminds me of a time on Game of Thrones where people, again, were just smart. Like seeing two smart people talk to each other. They're these two people playing like verbal chess, and you're kind of wondering what's really going on in the subtext of these characters. And it brings up this fascinating point about chaos, which is something that exists throughout the show. Game of Thrones is something that it always subverts our expectations. And these two people are pondering on that subject. Littlefinger believes that chaos is a ladder. It's a positive thing. It's a chance for opportunity for people who otherwise wouldn't get it. Whereas Varys only sees chaos as a destructive force. When things don't go according to plan, innocent people die. So it's kind of these dueling philosophies that make us wonder, do we love the unpredictable, bloody nature of Game of Thrones? Or is it something that is reckless and irresponsible because it kind of is this kind of Joker mindset where do we want to see the world burn? Is it fun, but is it responsible?
Well, and you don't have to agree with either of them, but in terms of what you think you should do or one should do, but they're both right. What they're both describing is the Wild West.
Yeah.
Right? And the Wild West is that people use it as a metaphor to mean, it's crazy. There's no rules, but also you could get rich.
Absolutely.
Which is the idea that works for both of them. People will die. It's a Wild West, and you will get rich if you survive.
Yeah. So season 3 ends with the Red Wedding. Obviously, everyone kind of agrees is one of the best sequences on the show, but we knew it was going to happen in the books. So let's move on to a moment that was not in the books at the start of season 4. This is just the moment with Arya and the Hound when they're in the inn. And it's just a nice small little moment with great dialogue. And I remember I think we were watching that first episode of season 4 and we're like, oh, this is just so great. Now Arya does get like a vengeful moment where she murders a guy in the books, but they put it in a new setting, specifically where she runs into Polliver, she gets Needle back, she avenges Lamy, and they're in this great moment where they're watching the innkeeper and his daughter get taken advantage of. And the Hound establishes his famous love of chicken.
Right.
And he brings up eating chickens like 8 times in the scene. And it's funny. There's so much great dramatic irony. And there's just several layers. The Hound doesn't even want to be here. It was Arya who dragged him in there because she recognized Polliver. And it's just a great moment that fortifies their friendship. So she's less of a captive now and more of an equal and a partner.
And this is the glimpse of Arya, the real Arya, or at least the Arya she becomes. If you go compare her acting in the character in the last season to this scene, you'll see she does this stare that is this, stare that like is seeing all the places needle can go through you.
Right, yeah.
And it starts right here in this moment, except, so many years earlier, and we probably didn't totally process how far down that path should go, but it was there from the beginning.
Yeah. This is the episode. It was titled Two Swords, and it opened with Tywin melting down Ned Stark's Valyrian steel sword into the 2 that he gave to Joffrey and to Jaime. But really, there were other swords in this scene, and really the reacquisition of Needle was such an important moment, arguably more important than the other titular 2 swords.
The way that she uses Needle, just if I remember correctly, it was just like a little poke in the throat.
Yeah, just a slow little thing into
making
his
a little
throat.
hole in the throat,
and then he bled out.
Or in his like windpipe or something. Just he bleeds out. To me also was this understanding that Arya in this moment realizes the rules are bullshit, and this is how easy it is to take someone's life.
Yeah.
Look, I just made that motion, and now that person's not going to be here in a moment, and I've avenged someone. It is this. She is creating a whole new world order inside of her head. Of this is how my world can work. I can walk up to someone, poke a hole in them, and then they're done.
Yeah. From here, we move on to one of the most shocking moments on the show. Probably the first moment that surprised both book readers and fans alike. Because at this point, book readers had seen the occasional conversation scene that was fun that they didn't know would happen. This is the scene that changed the nature of the show and the game as a whole. So this was season 4, episode 4, Oath Keepers, that suddenly ended with the shot of Craster's baby being taken by the White Walkers, and we follow them far, far up north, further than the books had ever gone, and we meet who ends up getting revealed as the Night King, and we see what their whole objective is to take babies and transform them into new young White Walkers. And we learned so much about the White Walkers in this moment, but it's really just a great mystery box.
Exactly.
Because it creates so many questions. They have a culture now. They're lined up in this almost it's like a ceremonial pattern. They have what looks like an ice altar. There's like a weird spirituality to this, rather than just being these in shadow ice demons that are very hard to kill and somehow undead. It looks like they have a culture and a society and a home. That's more than the book readers ever knew about the White Walkers.
And this is a good example of why we both defend the writers of the show, not because we think they're flawless, because I don't think I've ever read anything from a writer that didn't have flaws. It's these little adjustments that make them that show their understanding of storytelling. So to introduce a scene like this, you referred to it as mystery box, I refer to it as question tool. They use this moment of mystery or question to get you through exposition and the political chaos, and we're on the other side of the Red Wedding, so it's not even it was in a point in the show where we initially thought we were going to follow Ned Stark, and we're like, oh my god, he died, I guess we'll follow Robb Stark. Oh my god, he dies, and we haven't really established our new protagonist fully. It's a while before Jon is really that relevant. So in this moment, that's them realizing, I don't want to say it's a flaw necessarily in George's story, because again, the books it's such a different style of storytelling, but they're acknowledging in this moment, in the greater story, the audience is no longer as invested as they were pre-Red Wedding. It actually, the Red Wedding is such a great moment, but it actually is a very hard thing to write after, before something else huge happens. So they insert a scene that gives you this huge question, and it now provides gasoline for you to kind of have that in the background, and now you can get through some more shaking up. Probably one of the most famous examples for me of this is the opening to the Breaking Bad pilot.
Oh yeah.
It starts with just insane chaos. You have so many questions, and then it goes to the most boring story you can ever imagine. It's a middle school science teacher just going through his day, and it does that for like 20 minutes. but it earned the 20 minutes by just starting with the chaos. Same thing. This earned like episodes and episodes of just slight political maneuverings.
Yeah. And I think this is the moment that got people like us invested in Game of Thrones to make videos, because from here on outward, we had so much crazy online theories stemming from this moment about how the White Walkers, because now the White Walkers moved from a background lingering existential threat on the show to active antagonists that might play an even greater role in this series as it moves on. And we'll talk about later how that changed our expectations in Game of Thrones, because the rest of season 4, the bulk of season 5, kind of hit like a stalling point, because George R. R. Martin's plots in the books started to hit a bit of a stalling point. You know, a lot of the characters kind of reached what seemed like their goals but didn't have a whole lot to do. I assume in the next 2 books that he'll make pivots again. But the writers weren't really sure exactly where he was going with those storylines. But this happened. They finally made a big, bold decision at the end of season 5 with the Hardhome episode, which saw it was a step forward from the Craster's baby to the Night King introducing himself to the world as this new villain that is going to be an immediate threat to Jon. And now, to be clear, the Hardhome incident happens in the world of the books. It's mentioned, but we don't see a chapter with someone's point of view seeing that happen. So book readers knew once we saw that episode title was Hardhome that something bad was going to happen there. But as it unfolded in front of our eyes, I think we're all shocked by the disaster of Hardhome.
And this is another brilliant move, honestly, and it's one of the things that TV does really well, is it centralized the conflict into an individual.
Yes.
And it gave us someone to fear instead of a general presence, right? Like a lot of people talk about the shark in Jaws being something. It was like, well, we didn't need to see him so much. It's like, yeah, but could you imagine if all we saw was multiple shark fins throughout the movie? It would be uncentralized.
Yes.
And so to give us this focus, it actually made it a more direct threat. Something that I remember having this thought way back when I was so unsettled when in the previous moment we talked about when Craster's baby gets converted, and then in this moment we see it en masse, the idea of the blue eye change. And I remember finding it unsettling for like in a different way. And a long time later, I was just writing something history related, and I realized that way back when I first saw this, I subconsciously was thinking of the Nazi experiments, where this concept they used to try to make eyes blue. And it was literally like with like acid.
Yeah, the whole eugenics that they would try to genetically control.
And so this idea of trying to convert who's already there into, you know, his master race, and these blue-eyed, light-skinned, very light-skinned White Walkers. Obviously, you know, there's already someone typing a comment about like that's a stretch, but I do think that there is this unsettling thing of taking what we already are and converting it into what you think we should be. Which I think it was just like we don't know exactly. I mean, the blue eyes is something that is established previously, and I don't think that it was done purposely. But I think that deep down, especially dark-featured people, we're very scary of the blue eyes, like you.
Well, everyone with blue eyes is a murderous, soulless drone. I think that's a given. But I see what you're saying, and I think the horror of this moment is unparalleled. The way Sapochnik shot this sequence, just with the simplicity of the dead people's eyes flicking open kind of silently, it felt like a kind of a zombie feel. And this is a moment where I feel like Game of Thrones pivoted from something where the writing was in control to something where the directing took the driver's wheel. Because from this moment onward, it seemed like the writers were writing to gifted directors like Sapochnik to deliver the biggest, most fascinating spectacle. HBO was pouring money into the show at this point. So everything that happens after Hardhome, including Hardhome, feels more like building up toward big spectacle, big epic battle moments with a lot of extras and a lot of CGI.
Yeah, and obviously directing is a role that doesn't exist in books, right? It's the writer's medium. Television actually is often described as a writer's medium, but that actually, I'm glad you brought that up, the idea of the importance of directing. Not this moment, but another Miguel Sapochnik battle is the Battle of the Bastards. That episode is so good. Go watch that episode again. You can watch it on mute, and you're blown away, but you can watch it on mute.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that it's not really the writing that's blowing you away. Miguel Sapochnik is referencing the Great War films, Ron, and a bunch
and we'll talk about Battle
Solo.
of the Bastards in a second. That's coming up.
Okay, we'll transition there for a second. But my point there is that there was a weird sound.
An eye just fell off the raven.
Oh.
Yeah, he's given up.
Well, luckily he's got 3.
Yeah.
I think that Miguel Sapochnik showed us, look how good I can make this in spite of some awkward writing. So as we go through the Battle of Bastards, if you do rewatch it, you have to admit that there are some dumb choices made, that Jon Snow he tries to attack all the men by himself, basically. And then that's also the one where the Knights of the Vale come in and they save the day, but it actually is kind of another one of these moments where it was like, I don't know if that made me feel great about our characters, where like these other characters came out of nowhere, and why didn't Sansa tell them? I mean, it's battle strategy. Why would he not say, I have people coming up the rear to help? So it has a lot of actually uncomfortable moments, even though it's one of my favorite episodes, but it's because it's one of the best directed episodes.
Yeah. And we kind of see that trend going on into season 6. So I think one of the impressive moments with the writing of season 6 until before the ending was the whole arc with the Tower of Joy. This is a moment that book readers had wanted to see, one of the famous past moments. So I think it was a wise move for the writers to dramatize that, show a young Ned Stark, show the fear of him in that moment, because we always remembered it as a story that Bran would tell and other people around the continent would tell about how Ned Stark was able to defeat Sir Arthur Dayne, whereas Ned would remind Bran, he's like, the only reason I was able to do that is because Howland Reed. And we see in that moment where Ned's about to be killed, and we feel scared because even though we know Ned's going to live on, we feel that he's going to die in that moment. Howland Reed stabs him through the chest. But really what's impressive about the Tower of Joy is the way they kind of structured the reveal of Jon Snow's true lineage, which is something that many book readers had kind of speculated would be the case. But that reveal was so emotionally and dramatically done, and it was just super satisfying to see the show decide to stay true to that storyline, because they don't have to use all these things. And I just think it was impressive that by revealing Jon as the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, it gives this orphan a victory. As someone who is long suffering on the show, believing he's a bastard. But specifically what's brilliant about it is they tell us the truth about Jon seasons before Jon ever learns about it. And what's best about Jon is he's a character who knows nothing. He's more interesting to watch when he's kind of left out of the loop. So they cut from baby Jon to real Jon to tell us the truth about him, but we never have to worry about him knowing, because it's not as fun when he knows.
And honestly, when I think it's also a little partially like, once Jon knows, I'm sure the writers were a little bit, George didn't really tell us much about Jon's reaction to it. So I think that is one of the reasons why it gets pushed very late. And if you do look back at the last season, that probably is one of the flaws I can acknowledge outright, is it feels as if Jon finding out ultimately doesn't matter.
Right.
I think that'll go differently in the books, actually.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Now, before we continue, we also want to thank Mack Weldon for helping us make this episode. Mack Weldon makes smartly designed men's clothing, and their user experience is super easy and convenient. They made their name with men's underwear, and they have some really cool ones that have silver sewn into them that makes them naturally antimicrobial and anti-odor.
Basically, they smell better.
Yeah, which is great for underwear. And Mack Weldon has expanded beyond underwear and have all kinds of men's clothing like sweatshirts, hats, swim trunks, all kinds of stuff. I just ordered some of their t-shirts because I like the colors, and they had 16 to pick from. The website was easy to use, and the whole process was super convenient. I also got some of those silver underwear because, I'm excited to try them out and, apply some scientific method to my hygiene.
I was a microbiology major, and this is the only way I use it, was wearing Mack Weldon underwear.
For 20% off your first order, head to MackWeldon.com and enter the promo code Westeros at checkout. Again, that's promo code Westeros at MackWeldon.com for 20% off your first order. Now, I want to move on to later in season 6. We were talking about this, the Battle of the Bastards. Now, this was something not in the books. It's a plot point that Jon seemed to be headed toward before his Night's Watch mutineers took him out. But there was a whole idea with the Pink Letter where Ramsay Bolton was baiting him to come back and reclaim his family's home. Now, Philip, you're bringing up some interesting points before about how the writing seemed a little convenient to set up these spectacles. What I liked about this is it's not always easy to deliver effective payoff, to see what characters get what they deserve. And this happened both for the victors and the defeated in this battle. To see Sansa be the one to stick the dogs on Ramsay to put him to death was a very satisfying feeling.
An important moment for Sansa.
Yes. To see Jon tackle Ramsay and beat the crap out of him. To see Ramsay specifically use arrows throughout this battle as his primary weapon. Earlier in the series, we had seen him practicing on the flayed man people out before the Winterfell grounds. So he uses it to kill Rickon, and he uses it against 1-1, and he uses it against Jon in that final charge in the Winterfell courtyard. I thought there was some really smart choices made, both by the writers and the director of that episode, to make that the most effective payoff. And I think in the finale of season 6, this is kind of the finale that I think this is. If the show had ended at the end of season 6, yes, there would have been some questions people still had, but I think people would have been satisfied with this show.
This is, I mean, despite what I was saying about the writing, actually, this is my favorite movie in Game of Thrones, right? That's really what it was. It has its own arc, its own story. It's kind of its own twist ending and all of that. And, you know, it is so self-contained and done so well. But again, I feel like this is when I fell in love with Miguel Sapochnik. Yeah. And now we're getting married, so look at me.
Hey, congratulations.
No, but I just was watching this. I was like, why do I feel it so much? You know, we had the series up to this point, we had fallen in love with the dialogue very much. A lot of that was the mastery of George R.R. Martin and his dialogue. But later when I talk about this show, I've often said some of the best creators and filmmakers in the world are working on it. This is who I mean. I mean Miguel Sapochnik. And you can go, I did a breakdown of this episode actually, where I really get into the directing and cinematography techniques he's using in order for us to feel it. But specifically, there's that famous moment where Jon is overtaken by a sea of people, and he basically drowns within them. And it also was very reminiscent of, there was that shot of Daenerys Targaryen, so it had where she was surrounded by people as well,
the
and it had the nice parallel, like these people are on similar paths, and yes, eventually it did cross, but actually just in the directing of it, I remember I believe there was like heartbeat that you could hear there, and then you also had these shots. It was all designed in a way to make you feel like you were drowning. Yeah. And I felt it with this, and I felt it in Blade Runner 2049. Oh yeah. There's a great moment there where you in your seat start feeling like you're drowning, and this is when I was like, oh man, this guy is so good that this is now that it's done, honestly, still one of my favorite episodes, and it's still yet separate from the writing of the episode.
Yeah, and speaking of Miguel Sapochnik, I think we can agree maybe his best direction on the show came in the following episode, the season 6 finale, The Winds of Winter, when Cersei blew up the Sept. So, in my opinion, this is the best sequence of the series.
The first 20 minutes.
The first 20 minutes, yeah. It's so well written, directed, edited. The music is brilliant. This is the first time Ramin Djawadi used piano in a score on the show to show the shifting feel, the Winds of Winter changing.
Right, it's a new season.
Yeah, and the way the sequence was shot for 20 minutes, however long it lasts, each of the characters begins privately in their room getting dressed for their day, and you realize that they're prepping for their funerals. The way he shot them makes it look like clothes being put on a body by a mortician.
It's also a Sapochnik trademark shot too. He opens most of his episodes with the small choices that people are making that are going to be part of this huge epic event.
So this is a perfect example of foreshadowing on the show. They gave us just enough information to make us think that something like this could happen, but also make us feel surprised when it did happen. Because, of course, Wildfire was teased the first firework at the Battle of Blackwater, but then throughout the show there was just little bits of dialogue where characters were like, well, of course the Mad King did put wildfire all over the city.
Or do you remember this such a small choice, and this was like the show is being so subtle, and we're still such assholes for scrutinizing every frame so much that we still picked up on this. There's a shot that's panning through I believe the Red Keep, and the camera's swinging vertically, and it crosses across the ground, and on the floor you see a sewer grate, and it kind of just holds for a second and then keeps going, and we're like, that means that there's a wildfire beneath in the like sewers essentially. Right. It's gonna, like, we had so much based on just that idea.
It just reminded you that there were tunnels, that there was a system.
There was also hints of green started to get presented in throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another example of a moment that if this were the finale of the show, I think it would have been okay, because Cersei's story essentially ends here. Once she becomes the queen and she gets the throne. Tommen has committed suicide, so that fulfills her prophecy. She gets what she wants, but she becomes the ultimate villain of the show. And everything that happened afterwards with Cersei was just not as interesting, in my opinion. So if the series had ended, or if this had been somehow, if you could restructure things to make this happen in the final season, I would have been okay with this.
Yeah, this is the first time that we see her staring out that window, sipping her wine, and it feels so delicious in that moment, her victory. And then she never leaves that spot again, I believe. Like for the rest of the series, she's basically like, you know what? How about I only do my scenes in this window here?
Right. Now, moving on to season 7. Of course, the wall being collapsed by Viserion was fascinating, but that's something that I feel was all spectacle, not a ton of writing going on. But at the end of season 6, Arya kills Walder Frey, and season 7 begins with what I think was like the last moment I really just devoured the writing of this moment, which is when she gets revenge on the Freys by taking Walder Frey's face and wearing it. And when season 7 begins with Walder Frey, we're like, whoa, is this a flashback? Like, what is going on? But we get to see Arya get revenge against the Freys and kind of replay the Red Wedding the way that Cersei got revenge against the Faith by blowing up the Sept, kind of revenge for her walk of shame moment. Arya gets her revenge for her walk of shame by killing the Freys and giving this wonderful monologue that we get to see delivered by this actor who's like one of the best character actors ever on the show, talking about how you should have ripped out all the wolves root and stem, and if you leave one lone wolf, they'll come back and get you. And it's just this fascinating reveal. As they're drinking the wine, they get poisoned, and then she walks out. But I don't know how you felt about this. To me, this felt like it almost was the show jumping the shark after this.
After, right?
Yeah.
So this moment was very necessary, and I think it's actually one of the successful realignments between the story in the books and the story in the show, because this is something that Lady Stoneheart would have done. And this taking vengeance on the Red Wedding is basically that character's purpose. So giving that to Arya, actually, I thought was a great choice. It was the character that we wanted to see, and we needed to see start going down that path if she was going to become ruthless. Also, in retrospect now, we can see this is the moment that we get Arya's faceless man capabilities.
Yes.
It actually is really, even though she's used it in other ways, she's with Mary Trent and whatnot, this is really the payoff of 2 seasons of Arya training to be this faceless man. Later, we get the payoff with the Night King, obviously, and that's for her fighting ability, basically. But the spy stuff that she'd been working on, I wish it had come back after this, actually.
Yeah.
But really, this is it. And so I think, I thought this was a great moment. I do think, though, I'm going to stand by kind of what I was saying, where I started to notice subtle things happening in the writing the season before this. But yeah, this season is now fully embracing the D&D version of the story, and it did start to get a little bit more spectacle based and a little bit more what makes good TV. Yeah,
and I think, unfortunately, while the writers may have intended this on being the last time Arya would use a famous person's face to orchestrate this assassination, I think there was some mismanagement of expectations there, because after this, I mean, people like us who are doing theory videos online, everyone was wondering who next, who Arya would use. Would she use Jaime's face? Would she wear the Night King's face to go kill Cersei, or Jaime's face to go kill Cersei? So I think there was some kind of mismanagement of expectations, and I think we were seeing, and many of us were pointing this out, season 7 and 8. It was more about like rushing to get to the next big moment and payoff, and to kind of close the book and close the chapter, rather than just like living in the character's world for a second. But I feel like in season 8 we got one great moment of that, which came in episode 2, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, when Jaime knighted Brienne.
This picture looks like he's chopping her head in half.
Yeah, slowly slicing across her face.
Just like a ghost ship.
Yeah. But this is the moment where Jaime and Brienne's platonic relationship reaches its emotional climax by anointing Brienne, and this is, I think, my favorite part of it. Not only does he give her something she deserves, that she has earned more than any other character, Jaime, in a way, is kind of renewing his own vows and repairing the damage to his honor that he did by becoming the Kingslayer, by the crimes he committed against Bran, by all the bad things he's done on the show. Jaime's trying to find redemption in that moment by passing the torch on to someone else.
To me, this should have been the equivalent of their sex scene.
Yes.
I enjoyed this 1,000 times more. but not because I am jealous of who, but because I thought this was where the emotional climax of their story was, and it felt like it needed to be here. And this was also, this is why I also thought Brienne was going to die, because it felt like she had kind of completed a bit of a journey there. But I mean, this drew real tears. This was
for sure,
and this was a appropriate payoff to something that had been coming for so long, which is why I felt like the sex scene was unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree. And it's cool because if you think about it, by returning to Winterfell, Jaime brings back the other half of Ned Stark's old sword. So his sword is the one he got from Joffrey after Joffrey died. He gave his original sword to Brienne, Oathkeeper. So now the twin swords that were melted down from Ned Stark's sword are kind of reunified and reforged in a way.
That's a sex scene I would have been down to see, just banging the swords together the whole time.
And I think, in a way, Ned Stark's legacy, his spirit, is kind of overseeing the honor of this moment. So Ned Stark, it kind of comes full circle with Ned bearing his sword in the first episode. Not to say everything that came after that in season 8 was bad. I just think this is the last great character moment with really, really good writing that made us feel like this is the same show that was there in season 1. But we want to know what you guys think. Are there ones that we didn't mention in this episode? Clearly, there were great
giant
episodes.
Titty.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. There's so much good comedy writing that happened on this show, and good moments that were just really well adapted from the books. So we're not saying the Red Wedding wasn't worthy of mentioning. Of course, Red Wedding's great. Of course, Ned Stark's execution is great. There's lots of great things that happen on the show, but I think the writers who are working on this really show that they're capable of not needing George R. R. Martin's exact dialogue and kind of create great character moments.
The character moments are actually, a lot of people think that was their downfall. I actually think it was because they actually focused more on character than they did on world arc.
Yeah.
Which is what they'd been going through initially. So they definitely do actually know what they're doing with character. I just gotta wonder maybe if they'd started in charge of the character arcs, and then it maybe wouldn't have felt jarring.
Perhaps. But let us know in the comments down below what your favorite moment was, maybe that we mentioned, one that we missed. And make sure that you're subscribed to New Rockstars and subscribe to our podcast feed, Westeros Weekly, wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned for more interesting podcast content that we'll be having soon.
Yeah, make sure to hit me up on Twitter. I chat with you all on there. It's at Fimo, and you can also hit me up on Instagram at Filup Molina. I'll chat with you there too.
Yeah, and you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter at EA Voss. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank us for joining.
Yeah.